Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to see everybody here today, and also the opportunity to just give you a flavour of some of the thinking in relation to the Agri-food Tech Council, and also our thinking around skills and also the Centres of Innovation. As we all recognise, we always say this is a time of change, and I think probably that's been said over decades, but I certainly think in the particular situation that is certainly true. And I just want to kind of just build the background behind the thinking of forming initially the AgriTech Council and then what became the Agri-food Tech Council. And you'll have seen a lot of this information before, but I just wanted to remind you because it does set a context for some of the thinking and also the realisation about a focus on skills which will be essential for the UK to become remain and also be even more internationally competitive. This is essentially a list of grand challenges, global grand challenges, and you'll have seen many of these before, and obviously the UK is going to be impacted by these grand challenges. And certainly if we look at the top point here, one of them is about improving productivity through sustainability. And again, that is a key aspect of the council, and we recognise the opportunities where we can utilise a whole range of technological innovation. And we see that coming through in terms of new advances in genetics, in terms of sensing, in terms of robotics, a whole range. And it is about utilising some of these technologies. And again, I'll make some comment about that. But also, as well as actually improving productivity, we also need a better way of doing things. And in this context, I'm just going to actually highlight about reducing waste. And it's quite sanguine to actually just contemplate that actually around the world we're talking about something like 1.3 billion tonnes of food waste each year. And again, if you look at just the EU and North America, we're talking about 250 million tonnes, and that would be enough food to actually feed sub-Saharan Africa. And so as well as trying to produce more, it's also about the better use of what we are producing as well. Also other aspects, and you can see the range of grand challenges, and one is about actually maintaining biodiversity. And I think we can actually be reminded of that because we just look back at what happened when we had major challenges after the Second World War. And we see actually the Green Revolution with Borlaug, and that was about utilising new technologies, new approaches. And so it's about the application of that, which I'm going to mention briefly further on. And finally, it is about this ending of hunger. Now, the United Nations have actually up to now said that actually over the generations that we have kept up with population growth. And we're talking about now projected population growth of over 10 billion maybe by the middle of the century. But they're now warning us that maybe actually we're going to struggle to actually keep up in terms of food production. And so it is about using food in a better way, and also about how much we actually eat and the type of food we eat. So as well as about producing more, which is obviously central to what we as an industry need to consider, it's also about our approach to food and the way we utilise food. So that's kind of the overarching background. I also want to remind you about our particular sector. And this is actually, and again, it's worth remembering that our sector is the biggest industrial sector, employing about 4 million people. Of course, actually Carol had a slide showing the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, and of course we were disappointed, in fact, that our sector was not mentioned in that Green Paper, and a number of comments were made about that, because when one looks at the size of our sector, we're obviously keen to actually be involved with the development of the industrial strategy. And it's worth considering comments like, or information that in fact 60% of haulage in the UK is linked to food, to basically food and drink in the UK. And if you take a company like Sainsbury's, 1% of the national grid is utilised by Sainsbury's in terms of their stores and in terms of refrigeration. So that indicates the impact of our sector and the importance of our sector within the UK. Now, on this particular slide, we're looking at a GVA in terms of what we contribute, somewhere in the region on this slide of 108 billion. In fact, we had a council meeting yesterday, and the latest figures we have for the end of 2015, it's gone up to 112 billion. And basically, it's equating to maybe getting on for 7 or 8% of GVA. So that's the side of our sector. It's obviously massive, has a major impact, and it's about the way that we approach that and the skills that we need to maintain and grow this sector even further and make us more competitive. Now, we as a sector are also part of the bioeconomy, And from that standpoint, I think the UK has a very good track record. And again, just to pick out several aspects of this, obviously, in terms of agriculture, we're in these types of areas in terms of food and obviously production of a whole range of crops. In fact, if one looks at the metrics, the UK is one of the leading countries in bioeconomy innovation. It's been said that we may be ranked anything between 2nd and 7th after the US. So that's really a good message, and one that we can build on as we develop our sector further. But to maintain that, we obviously need a skills agenda which actually will provide the skills and training that this sector will need for the people coming through into that sector. In addition, it's estimated that the bioeconomy is forecast to grow by anything up to 13% over the next 15 years, which actually shows again the further need for increased skill and training because the workforce will continue to increase. However, if we look at UK agri-food sector, it is facing a number of challenges in terms of global competitiveness, and I'm just going to just remind you of several figures here. If one actually looks at global food exports, they're expected to increase somewhere in the region of 90%, or they have increased over 90% in real terms over the last 14 or 15 years, and they continue to grow at an even higher rate. However, if one looks at B here, we can see that UK productivity is lagging behind the rest of the world. If we look at C, we can see that the trade balance has widened by 26%. If one looks at the figures here. In fact, again, we saw some figures yesterday, and you'll be pleased to hear that, in fact, that in terms of our exports, they've actually increased to something like 20 billion. The bad news is that our imports have increased to 42.5 billion. So that trade gap has widened, which shows an actual, I suppose, more of an issue for us in the UK in terms of meeting some of the required increase in food production that we need as a nation. In addition, if we actually look at UK competitiveness, and I think this is a key figure that I like to see, this is the UK here, and this is, if you compare it to the Netherlands, and you think of the size of the Netherlands. So from a UK perspective, we do lag behind in terms of competitiveness. And we do know that skills, investment is key to the improvement of competitiveness. Now, in terms of the AgriTech strategy, this was launched on the basis of some of the information that I've been giving you back in 2013. I'm sure many of you have seen the document that was produced by the Council. And what I've done here is just to actually give this information, just to show you that progress has been made and that we have delivered against some of the objectives that were set out in that strategy. Obviously, the key objectives linked to technological innovation, also to building skills and leadership, and obviously trying to improve funding and investment performance. So these are some of the key objectives delivering against. And just to highlight several initiatives, firstly, there's the one relating to catalysts and the Food Innovation Network. In fact, again, the sixth round of the catalysts has now been completed. There's about 129 projects funded, and the first of those projects that were funded in round 1 and 2 are starting to come to fruition. So we're actually setting up a review of that, because obviously we hope that this has been a successful investment, and obviously we'll be able to tell that from our review, on the hope that if that has been a successful investment, that we want to maintain and continue this type of investment, as we see it's critical to actually the application of innovation, the application of new innovation going forward. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about Centres for Agricultural Innovation. There have been 4 centres established, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And again, we've been focusing on skills, including things like the discussion around professional frameworks, and obviously a more effectively joined up wider agricultural skills agenda. Because as Carol was indicating, we're talking about a skills agenda across the whole portfolio, from entry level right through to PhD and beyond. Now in 2016, actually, the AgriTech Council became the Agri-food Technical Council, and that was essentially expanded to drive efficiencies along the entire agri-food value chain. So in other words, as well as including pre-farm gate, it was post-farm gate and food production. And again, it maintained some of the similar objectives, but a key aspect was about securing the global the global agri-food growth opportunities, and also to ensure that, in fact, we see the application of new technologies coming through. And it's three main areas, really. One was about providing trusted expert advice to government and industry. And I recall, actually, when the AgriTech Council was initially set up, David Willits actually was chairing it then. And at that first meeting, he said he saw the role of the council was to challenge the government. And we've maintained that stance of challenging the government to take the industry forward in a positive way, and obviously also to keep saying the need to invest within our industry. It was also to promote a joined up network of stakeholders. In that respect, we see skills as a key aspect of that, as outlined in Carol's presentation earlier. And then finally, it was about having oversight of activities within the scope of the council, and that included things like centres for agricultural innovation, and also there's been a new initiative relating to the Food Innovation Network, which actually includes a whole range of SMEs. Now, in terms of how we go forward as an industry, we know that it's essential that we actually translate the research and development and innovation into practical intervention. And we know that obviously that's going to be key if we're going to actually go forward and utilise the technology and ensure that the UK becomes even more internationally competitive. Again, I want to just go through a couple of key points which I think does highlight the need for further investment, and also to have a greater focus on this. And I think if one looks at chart A, basically what it's saying is that only 25% of people interviewed admitted to having introduced an innovative practice in their livestock business in this case. So in other words, even though there's new technology out there, it's also about the application of that technology. This is just not key to the UK, actually one sees it all around the world. So there is a key aspect of this in terms of making sure that we apply the new technologies. The other aspect I want to also just mention is that of course part of this ensuring that we get practical intervention links to the Catalyst projects that obviously have been funded through those 6 rounds that I mentioned previously. And obviously we want to ensure that we actually maximise the application of the research and development into new innovation. I also want to just finish this slide by one final point, and that's this point here. This is a quote from the Research Excellence Framework sub-panel, which actually reviewed research in veterinary science, agriculture and food science at the last Research Excellence Framework peer-reviewed programme. And it stated that veterinary and agriculture and related subjects have the lowest and third lowest number of PhD graduates, respectively, of all UK disciplines. I think that's something that we need to think about, because we want innovation and new technology, but getting new technology and innovation is built on a very sound research and development basis, and we know that some of the funding for that has been cut over the decades. It's essential we don't lose that, because obviously we're talking about a skills agenda from entry level right through to PhD and beyond. So we feel this is an essential aspect that needs to be considered going forward. Now, just to finish, in terms of the Agri-food Innovation Centres, 4 centres have been now created. Agrimetrics, which is focusing on big data. Crop and health protection. We have the Centre for Innovation Excellence for Livestock, which includes livestock nutrition, health and genetics. We have Agri-EPI, which is engineering and precision and innovation. And these have now been set up. It's still very early days. They're going through their first year, and so they will be being developed. And in terms of the remit that they were given, it is about having open access platforms to be used by anyone. It is about delivering applied research to solve industry problems. It's about working together as a family of centres, and we see that happening particularly around agrimetrics, because obviously having robust data is essential if we're going to make the key decisions and the right decisions for strategies going forward. And also, part of the background to this is about having matched industry funding, so that industry is key to the development of these centres and has to obviously benefit from these centres if this initiative is going to be successful. And also, one of the key deliverables of the centres was around the skills agenda, that in terms of new developments coming through, new skills coming through, need to be actually given to the broader community. And so that is the key deliverable that the centres have been challenged to deliver against. In terms of the centres, this just gives you an overview of what we're talking about in terms of the 4 centres, and they contain a whole range of institutions, and you can see that they're distributed around the whole of the UK. Of course, there are other key centres of excellence around the UK, and some of these are listed here, as well as universities, the Catapult Network, Innovation and Knowledge Centres. So it is about bringing all this together, because we are a disparate, sector, but also it is about coming together so that we can maximise the synergies and the advantages of having that synergy. In terms of the skills agenda, just to complete my presentation, we want to, create an agri-food system with skills and capacity that are fit for the future. And this just shows you the philosophy underpinning that title, basically, that in fact, but there are some challenges actually, and again I wanted to highlight some of those challenges. I mean, if one looks at the qualification for workers in the Agri-food Centre, it's consistently low across several metrics, and you can see this table here. And also that 7% of agricultural workers only 7% of agricultural workers have completed apprenticeships. And this is one that I think is kind of interesting, that only 32% of managers in agriculture have training, formal training. And this table here shows you how we compare to Germany, France, Netherlands, our EU competitors. You can see that we're only about 50%. It does improve when we look at the under 35s. But this shows you the challenge that we have in terms of our skills agenda, and actually the way we need to develop our skills agenda if we're going to maintain our international competitiveness and in fact improve it. In terms of what needs to be done to develop the skills and capacity for the UK agri-food sector, and basically what I've done is listed a number of bullet points that the council have been discussing, and some of these we'll be wanting to take forward, so that within the scope of the end-to-end value chain, which is now the Agri-food Tech Council, it is essential that we build the appropriate skills solutions, really, that is at a scale that will ensure the sector is enabled and ready for the future challenges. And I've just listed some bullet points here about defining the future needs of the sector. Also, it's about ensuring that the standard of the skills training is at the appropriate quality, and within that there's a discussion around having a national framework. Obviously, it is about mapping the current landscape provision, not just from a quality perspective, but also a value perspective. And also we need to look at future requirements. Where are the gaps? You know, where do we need the skills that will be required as we develop and innovate going forward? And also, one of the key discussion points, and it's interesting that Lee from the National Land-Based College asked a question, because one of the key issues is that we are quite a disparate sector, and therefore even for those of us that are in the sector, you see all the different initiatives, and the last thing the council wants to do is to undermine any of those initiatives. But it's about bringing those together. Now we need to attract the best into our sector, and the way we do that is by actually educating and obviously highlighting the career opportunities. Now we're an increasing urbanised society, so the question is, how do we do that? Well, we do it by going to schools, starting at the primary level, not just talking to the pupils, but talking to the parents, the teachers, and showing the examples that our sector can actually give, you know, during their learning through this, I suppose, key aspect of their learning. And finally, we're talking about the engagement between government departments, and this is something we've been discussing, and in fact already within the Agri-food Tech Council we have BEIS, we have DEFRA, DFID, and also we're engaging with the Department of Education. And within that, there has been a discussion around apprenticeships, and you know that's been a focus of this current government. But we must not forget that that's just one aspect of our training portfolio, right from entry level right through to PhD and beyond. So that's my final slide, except to say thank you. I'm just going to make two final points. And those of you that have been listening attentively will recognise that I have not mentioned the B word. Now the B word I'm talking about is the one that finishes with exit. Because no matter what type of strategy the government has and we come to as we leave the EU, skills and training will be essential so that we can compete internationally. So it's not dependent on the type of Brexit. We recognise that we need the skills and training expertise and investment if we're going to stay competitive going forward. I want to finish just by basically a comment, and this was a comment by Professor Megginson. It's back in 1963, and he was interpreting Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. And his statement was, "It is not the strongest of the species who survive, nor the most intelligent, but rather it is those most responsive to change." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll take a break shortly, but before that, some questions for Bob. There's one over here. Just like to wait for the mic, and then one at the back there.
Tim Williams from Food and Farming Futures. Excuse me. Thank you, Bob, for a brilliant presentation. And I wonder if you'd agree with me that one of the missing components here might be a national library for agri-food that we're trying to form through Food and Farming Futures, which you helped to start up.
Yes, I mean, I think we have to look at all aspects of how we actually, obviously, increase the knowledge of our particular sector. So I think anything that will help to do that. I suppose in terms of, and I see Jim Godfrey sitting over there, who also sits on the council. He may have a comment. I think it is about how do we take all these different initiatives and how do we apply them in a coordinated way that obviously for us in the sector that we take full advantage as well as becomes available to those out with the sector. And so my view is, yes, I think we need all these initiatives. The question is how will it be applied and how will it be applied to the general public and the broader, I suppose, I suppose people outside of our sector. Because from my standpoint, as well as doing the skills and training, it's also showing the career opportunities so we attract, I suppose, people from other disciplines, whether it's engineering, computer science. So that would be my view on that.
So there's a question at the back.
Thank you very much. Kate Barrow from ADAS.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you also for a very interesting presentation. I, for my sins, have been working in the agriculture and food sector for over 30 years now. And when the Brexit vote came through, the sort of standard questions that were asked about, well, will I still get my direct subsidy? And what will it mean for me as a farmer? I think one of the big issues that seems to face the sector is the complete lack of business, macro and microeconomics. And it would be a massive plea to those designing courses that is a real need, alongside people that can understand export and import, that are able to go and negotiate. I know we'll have some marvellous negotiators, and one standing at the back, he's in the doorway on behalf of the government. But there is a need in the sector to actually be able to do those sorts of negotiations. So it's a plea really that please put those sort of courses on.
Okay, well, we'll obviously make a note of that. Maybe Ian will have a comment on that when he makes his presentation. Obviously, I mean, that is an aspect that is considered by the council, and there were some discussions yesterday, but I can't go into the detail. But we do recognise that, and obviously we recognise that we have to operate, within the global network, and obviously we need to look at how we're doing and how we're performing in that context, really.